I never thought I'd see the day when my own daughter would look at me with such contempt. After 4 decades of caring for strangers at their most vulnerable moments at Boston Memorial, I found myself crawling on my bedroom floor, tears streaming down my face, my surgical wound throbbing with every movement. "Mom, what are you doing?" Melissa stood in the doorway, not rushing to help me as I struggled to reach the bathroom. Her voice wasn't concerned. It was annoyed. "I've been calling for 20 minutes, I whispered, my throat raw. "I need to use the bathroom and take my pain medication." "We can't hear you from downstairs. You know that." She sighed dramatically, checking her watch. "Derek and I have that dinner with the hospital board in an hour." I hadn't known about any dinner. They hadn't mentioned it when they'd agreed to care for me after my total knee replacement, a surgery I'd postponed for years because I was always too busy taking care of everyone else. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, the words falling from my lips before I could stop them. Even now, at 68 years old, I was apologizing for needing help. Melissa reluctantly helped me to the bathroom, her movements efficient but cold, so different from how I'd taught her to handle patients. I noticed the expensive watch on her wrist, a gift from me last Christmas, and the designer dress she wore. So much of what surrounded them had been made possible by my decades of careful saving and generosity. When she helped me back to bed, Derek appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his tailored suit. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, not really looking at me. "Mom needs her medication," Melissa said, her voice tight. "Can you get it? I need to finish my makeup." Derek's face darkened. "Again? Didn't she just take it 3 hours ago?" "It's time for her scheduled dose," Melissa replied. I lay there, listening to them talk about me as if I wasn't in the room. This wasn't the first time since I'd arrived a week ago. Small comments, exchanged glances, sighs of inconvenience. They'd been building. "I can try to reach it myself," I offered, attempting to lean toward the nightstand. No, I'll get it." Derek's voice was clipped as he handed me the pill bottle and a glass of water. That's when it happened. As I fumbled with the child-proof cap, the bottle slipped from my hands, pills scattering across the hardwood floor. "For God's sake!" Derek exploded, his face flushing red. "That's it! I've had enough!" Melissa rushed back into the room. "What happened?" "Your mother dropped her pills everywhere." "I don't have time for this." I tried to apologize, tried to reach for the fallen medication, but the movement sent searing pain through my surgical leg. "Stop!" Melissa snapped. "You'll tear your stitches and then what? We'll have to take you back to the hospital?" "I'm sorry," I whispered again, tears welling in my eyes. That's when they both seemed to crack, years of hidden resentment boiling over. "Do you know what we've given up this week?" Melissa's voice rose. "I've had to reschedule 3 surgeries. Derek's missed 2 important meetings." "We're not your servants, Anne," Derek added, using my first name, something he'd never done before. "And we're definitely not your nurses." "You spent your whole life taking care of strangers," Melissa continued, her words cutting deeper than any surgical knife ever could. "Did you expect us to drop everything for you? We have careers too." "Not everyone can be the legendary Nurse Simmons," Derek muttered, the contempt in his voice unmistakable. Then came the words that shattered whatever illusions I had about our relationship. "We're not your infirmers," they shouted in unison, their faces twisted with frustration. "We have our own lives." In that moment, something crystallized within me. I saw with perfect clarity what I had refused to see for years, how my desire to be needed, to help, had allowed this toxicity to grow. I thought of the down payment I'd given them for this house, the tuition I'd paid for Melissa's medical school, the emergency funds I regularly deposited into their account, because they always seemed to be stretching beyond their means. I remembered my late husband Thomas's words before he passed 15 years ago. "Annie, you can't buy love or respect, even from family." My hands stopped shaking. My tears dried. A strange calm settled over me as I reached for my phone on the nightstand. "What are you doing?" Melissa asked, suddenly wary of my composure. "Making 2 very important calls," I replied, my voice steadier than it had been all week. "You both should go to your dinner. Don't worry about me." They exchanged confused glances, but seemed relieved to have an excuse to leave. "We'll be back around 11, Derek said, already backing toward the door. As they left, I heard them whispering, probably about what to do with me. Little did they know, I was already deciding what to do with them. I looked at my phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the first number. "Hello, this is Ann Simmons. I need to speak with Mr. Peterson in accounts, please. It's an emergency." My journey from doormat to doorkeeper had begun. When the bank manager answered, my voice didn't waver. "Mr. Peterson, I need all joint accounts with Melissa and Derek Winters frozen immediately, and terminate their access to my personal accounts." "Mrs. Simmons, this is unusual. Are you certain?" His concern was evident, but I'd been banking there for 30 years. "Absolutely certain. Also, please prepare a full accounting of all withdrawals they've made in the past 5 years." I paused, remembering the loans that were never discussed again, "and cancel any automatic transfers to their accounts." After confirming my identity, he promised to handle everything immediately. It should all be processed before morning. "Thank you. And one more thing. Has the mortgage payment for 247 Beacon Street been processed this month?" I asked, already knowing the answer. There was an uncomfortable pause. "No, Mrs. Simmons. That's the 3rd consecutive month it's been late." I closed my eyes, another piece falling into place. Not only were they treating me like a burden, but they weren't even making payments on the house I'd helped them buy, a house that technically still had my name on the deed as co-owner. My second call was to James Harrington, my attorney for the past 20 years. "Anne, is everything all right?" His familiar voice was concerned. "No, James, it's not." I explained the situation, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I need formal eviction papers drawn up immediately. They have 48 hours to vacate the premises." "That's unusually harsh, even under these circumstances," he cautioned. "Are you sure you don't want to give them more time?" I thought about the cold looks, the whispers, the resentment that had clearly been festering for years while I remained blind to it. "They've had plenty of time, and plenty of my money. 48 hours, James, and I want the papers delivered tomorrow morning." After hanging up, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how I'd missed the signs. Perhaps I hadn't missed them at all. I'd simply chosen to ignore them, desperate to believe that my generosity would translate into love and appreciation. The house grew quiet around me. For the first time since my surgery, I felt a strange sense of peace. The pills still lay scattered on the floor, but the pain in my knee seemed distant compared to the ache in my heart. Using the walker they'd reluctantly provided, I managed to get myself to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders slumped. For decades, I'd been Nurse Simmons, confident, respected, the one people turned to in crisis. When had I allowed myself to become this diminished version of myself? I splashed cold water on my face and made a decision. I wouldn't spend another night in this house. Using my phone, I called the one person I knew I could count on, Vivian Torres, my friend of 30 years and former head of physical therapy at Boston Memorial. "Viv, it's Anne. I hate to ask, but I need help." 20 minutes later, she was at the door, her warm brown eyes widening when she saw my condition. "My God, Anne, what's happening? Where are Melissa and Derek?" "At a dinner," I replied simply, the inadequacy of the explanation hanging in the air. Vivian didn't need more details. She'd always seen through my excuses for Melissa's behavior. "I'm taking you home with me, right now. I can't impose—" "Stop it," she cut me off firmly. "For once in your life, let someone take care of you without argument." As she helped me gather my medications and a few belongings, I told her everything. The cruel words, the years of financial support, the mortgage they weren't paying, and the calls I'd just made. Instead of the shock I expected, Vivian nodded with grim satisfaction. "It's about damn time, Annie. I've watched you give and give while they take and take for years. Why didn't you say something?" I asked, wincing as we made our way down the stairs. "Would you have listened?" Her direct gaze held mine. "You've always been determined to see the best in Melissa, even when there wasn't much to see." The truth of her words stung, but I couldn't deny them. When we reached her car, Vivian carefully helped me into the passenger seat. "You know this won't be pretty when they find out, right?" I nodded, watching my daughter's house, the house my money had bought, grow smaller in the side mirror. "I'm counting on it." At Vivian's comfortable condo, she settled me in her guest room, which was ironically more accessible than the room Melissa and Derek had given me. As she helped me into bed, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not the silent tears of someone trying to avoid being a burden, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a woman mourning decades of misplaced devotion. Vivian sat beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder. "Get it all out, honey. Tomorrow's going to be a new kind of battle." She was right. For 40 years, I'd fought to save lives, to ease suffering, to bring comfort to the sick and dying. Now, at 68, I was facing a different kind of fight. One for self-respect, for boundaries, for the recognition that generosity without reciprocity isn't kindness. It's self-destruction. As I drifted off to sleep in Vivian's guest room, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Dinner running late. Don't wait up." I turned off my phone without responding. They'd discover soon enough that I wasn't waiting up. In fact, I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. The nurse who had spent her life attending to others was finally attending to herself. I woke to the sound of my phone ringing incessantly. The digital clock on Vivian's nightstand read 9:17 a.m., 23 missed calls and 35 text messages, all from Melissa and Derek. "Where are you?" "Mom, this isn't funny. Your walker is still here, but you're gone. Answer your phone." The latest message, received just minutes ago, was different. "There's some man here with legal papers." What's going on? So James had delivered the eviction notice. I could picture Melissa's face, the shock, the disbelief, the rapid calculation of what this meant for her carefully constructed life. Derek would be pacing, running his hands through his hair the way he did when hospital budgets didn't balance. My finger hovered over the call button, but Vivian gently took the phone from my hand. "Breakfast first," she said firmly. "You'll need your strength." She helped me to her dining room where she'd prepared eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. I couldn't remember the last time someone had made me breakfast. At Melissa's, I'd been expected to fend for myself despite barely being able to stand. "They found the papers," I said, picking at my toast. Vivian nodded. "Good. How do you feel?" "Terrified, relieved, guilty." I looked up at my friend. "Is that strange? To feel guilty about standing up for myself? For you? It's practically a reflex." Vivian's eyes were kind but unflinching. "You've spent your life making sure everyone else's oxygen mask was secure before even thinking about your own." My phone rang again. Melissa's face appeared on the screen. "You should answer," Vivian said, "but put it on speaker. I want to hear what that ungrateful daughter of yours has to say." I took a deep breath and pressed the green button. "Hello, Melissa." "Mom, where are you?" Her voice was shrill, panicked. "There's some lawyer here saying we have to leave our house in 48 hours. And the bank called Derek saying our accounts are frozen. What's happening?" "I think you know exactly what's happening," I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. "I've simply taken your words to heart. You're not my nurses, and I'm not your ATM. Is this because of what we said yesterday? We were stressed, Mom. You can't possibly—" "I can, and I have." I cut her off, surprising myself with my firmness. "The house payments you've been forgetting to make for the past 3 months? That stops now. The emergency funds you've been using for vacations and renovations? That stops too. How did you—" "We were going to catch up on those payments." Derek's voice now. They had me on speaker too. "This is completely unreasonable." "Is it?" I asked. "Tell me, Derek, was it reasonable to leave your mother-in-law crawling on the floor for 20 minutes when she needed help? Was it reasonable to resent caring for me for 1 week when I paid for your wife's entire medical education?" Silence on the other end. Then Melissa, her voice suddenly softer, calculating. "Mom, you're upset, and you have every right to be. We've been under a lot of pressure lately with work, but that's no excuse. Come home, and we'll talk about this like adults." "I am home," I replied, "just not at your house." "Where are you?" The panic was creeping back into her voice. "With someone who actually cares about my well-being." I glanced at Vivian, who gave me an encouraging nod. "The eviction stands, Melissa. You have until tomorrow morning." "You can't do this. Where are we supposed to go?" "You're both highly paid medical professionals. Figure it out." The words felt foreign in my mouth, direct, unapologetic. "This isn't you, Mom." Melissa's voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone's influencing you." "Is it Vivian?" "I bet it's Vivian." My friend rolled her eyes so dramatically I almost laughed despite the tension. "No one is influencing me except you and Derek. You showed me exactly who you are and what I mean to you. Consider it a valuable lesson, one I should have learned years ago." "We'll fight this," Derek interjected. "You can't just throw us out of our home." "Actually, I can. Check the deed, Derek. My name is still on it because you insisted it would be easier for the mortgage application. The mortgage you haven't been paying, by the way." I could hear them whispering frantically to each other, no doubt realizing the precariousness of their position. "Mom?" Melissa tried again, her voice honeyed now. You've just had major surgery. You're on pain medication. You're not thinking clearly. Let's not make any hasty decisions. My mind hasn't been this clear in years, I replied. And if you're concerned about my medical state, that's interesting, considering yesterday you couldn't be bothered to help me to the bathroom. Another silence then. What do you want? Is this about money? Because if it is, it's not about money, Melissa. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that relationships aren't transactional. I don't want anything from you except for you to comply with the eviction notice. After everything I've done for you? Her voice cracked, genuine emotion breaking through the calculation. I'm your daughter. The question hung in the air, heavy with decades of complicated history. Yes, you are my daughter, and I will always love you. I took a deep breath. But love without respect isn't healthy for either of us. I've enabled behaviors that aren't serving anyone well. That stops now. So you're just cutting us off? Throwing us out? Disbelief colored her words. I'm creating boundaries, long overdue ones. I felt tears threatening, but pushed them back. What happens next is up to you. This isn't over, Derek growled. You'll regret this. I've regretted many things in my life, Derek. Setting boundaries isn't going to be one of them. With that, I ended the call. Vivian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Anne. That couldn't have been easy. The phone immediately began ringing again. I turned it off completely. It wasn't, I admitted, feeling drained yet somehow lighter. But it was necessary. As Vivian helped me to the living room couch, I realized that for the first time in decades, I wasn't calculating what someone else needed from me. Instead, I was finally asking myself, what do I need? The answer was beginning to take shape, and it looked nothing like the life I'd been living. When James called that afternoon to report that Melissa and Derek were attempting to contest the eviction, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was my own reaction. Not panic or regret, but a steely resolve I hadn't felt since my early days in nursing, when I'd stand up to dismissive doctors who underestimated my knowledge. They're claiming you're mentally incompetent due to your medication and recent surgery, James explained, his voice matter of fact. They've already contacted your surgeon to request your medical records. They won't get them, I replied confidently. Doctor-patient confidentiality still applies, even to family members who are doctors themselves. That's correct. However, they're building a case that you're being unduly influenced and are incapable of making sound financial decisions. I laughed without humor. Interesting argument from people who haven't paid their mortgage in 3 months, despite having 2 six-figure incomes, James chuckled. I made a similar point to their hastily acquired attorney. Anne, I don't want you to worry. Their case is weak, especially given that you've been making sophisticated financial and legal decisions throughout your career. After our call, Vivian helped me perform the physical therapy exercises I'd been neglecting at Melissa's house. The pain was excruciating, but necessary. A fitting metaphor for what I was going through emotionally. They're not going to let this go easily, I winced, as I bent my knee as instructed. Of course not, Vivian replied, gently supporting my leg. You've pulled the financial rug out from under them. People show their true colors when money's involved. I just keep thinking about all the signs I ignored over the years, I admitted. The way Melissa would tense up whenever someone at the hospital mentioned my name. How Derek would make little comments about my interference even while accepting my help. You wanted to believe the best of them, Vivian said. That's not a character flaw, Anne. It's just that some people take kindness for weakness. Around 6 that evening, my phone, which I'd briefly turned back on, lit up with a text from an unexpected source. Caroline Jenkins, my former nursing colleague who now worked at the rehabilitation facility connected to Boston Memorial. Anne, your daughter was just here asking questions about available rooms for you. Said you're having cognitive issues after surgery and need supervised care. Something feels off. Call me. My hands shook as I showed Vivian the message. They're trying to have you committed, Vivian said, outrage coloring her voice, to a rehab facility where they can claim you need constant supervision. And once I'm there, they could petition for temporary guardianship, I added, the pieces falling into place. Especially if they convince my doctors I'm not thinking clearly. I immediately called Caroline back, explaining the situation in detail. I knew something wasn't right, she said. Melissa was asking about facilities with memory care units which made no sense for a knee replacement patient, and she kept emphasizing how confused you've been. Caroline, if anyone from my family tries to admit me or claims authority to make decisions for me, say no more, she interrupted firmly. I'll alert all departments. No one will admit you without speaking directly to you first, and I'll make sure your surgeon knows what's happening. No sooner had I ended that call than my doorbell rang. Vivian peered through the peephole and stepped back, her expression grim. It's Melissa, and she's not alone. There's a man in a uniform with her. A police officer? I asked, alarm rising in my throat. No, looks like paramedics? Anne, I think they're trying to force the issue. My heart pounded as Vivian cracked the door, keeping the security chain engaged. Can I help you? She asked, her voice deceptively pleasant. I'm here to see my mother. Melissa's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I know she's in there. Your mother doesn't wish to see visitors right now, Vivian replied calmly. This isn't a social call, Melissa snapped. We have concerns about her mental state and physical safety. We've brought medical transport to take her to a facility where she can receive proper care. The paramedic looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Ma'am, we received a call about an elderly post-surgical patient experiencing confusion and requiring medical intervention. That elderly patient is a respected medical professional who is perfectly competent, Vivian replied. And she's not confused in the slightest. That's for doctors to determine, Melissa insisted. Vivian, you're interfering with necessary medical care. That could be construed as elder abuse. I'd heard enough. Using my walker, I made my way to the door. Open it, Vivian, I said quietly. She looked concerned but removed the chain, allowing the door to swing open fully. Melissa's eyes widened when she saw me standing there, dressed in clean clothes, hair neatly combed, fully alert. Mom, she faltered, we've been so worried. No, you haven't, I interrupted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. You've been worried about your finances and your reputation, not about me. I turned to the paramedic. Sir, I apologize that you were brought here under false pretenses. As you can see, I'm alert and oriented. I gestured to my surgical leg. I had a total knee replacement last week, but my mind is perfectly clear. The man looked between Melissa and me, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. She's on heavy pain medication, Melissa insisted. She's not making rational decisions. I reduced my pain medication 2 days ago, I countered. And I've made perfectly rational decisions my entire life, including the decision to stop enabling ungrateful family members. Perhaps I should contact my supervisor, the paramedic said, reaching for his radio. That won't be necessary, came a new voice from behind them. James stood in the hallway, his imposing figure a welcome sight. I'm Mrs. Simmons's attorney, and I have paperwork proving her competency was assessed just this morning by an independent psychiatrist. This was news to me. James had been busy indeed, but I didn't let my surprise show. Melissa's face flushed with anger. You had no right to freeze our accounts. That money was promised to us. And there it was, the real reason for this desperate attempt. Not concern for my well-being, but panic over their financial situation. I had every right, I replied calmly. And I never promised you unlimited access to my life savings. What about everything you owe me? After all I've sacrificed, tears welled in her eyes, but I recognized the manipulation for what it was. Sacrificed, I echoed, incredulous. I paid for your education, your wedding, your house, and held it over my head my entire life, she shouted, mask finally dropping completely. Always the perfect Nurse Simmons, making sure everyone knew how generous she was, while making me feel like I could never measure up. The paramedic backed away, clearly wanting no part of this family drama. James stepped forward, placing himself between Melissa and me. I think it's time you left, he said firmly. Any further communication should go through me. As Melissa was ushered away, still protesting, I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that I'd never fully acknowledged before. Not just anger or entitlement, but deep-seated resentment that had been festering for years. I closed the door and leaned heavily on my walker, suddenly exhausted. Are you okay? Vivian asked gently. No, I admitted, but I will be. What I didn't say was that something had broken inside me, the last tenuous thread of the illusion that my relationship with my daughter could ever be what I'd hoped for. It was a death of sorts, and like any death, it would require mourning. But first, I needed to protect myself from the storm that was clearly just beginning. The next morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Wary after yesterday's confrontation, I almost didn't answer. "Hello? Mrs. Simmons? This is Dr. Harrison, your knee surgeon." His familiar voice was concerned. "I thought I should call you directly. Your daughter has been rather persistent about your post-operative care." I sighed, sinking deeper into Vivian's comfortable armchair. "Let me guess. She suggested I'm experiencing unusual confusion or cognitive decline." "Something along those lines," he confirmed. "She's requested copies of your surgical reports and medication lists, citing concerns about adverse reactions. As your surgeon, I found that odd since she was present during our pre-surgical consultations where we discussed all potential side effects." "Dr. Harrison, I want to be completely transparent with you," I said. "My daughter and I are in the middle of a significant personal conflict that has nothing to do with my surgery or recovery. She's attempting to use my medical situation to gain leverage." There was a pause then. "I suspected as much. Mrs. Simmons, I've known you professionally for 15 years. The idea that you would suddenly become incapable of making sound decisions struck me as highly improbable." Relief washed over me. "Thank you for calling me directly." "Of course. And just to put your mind at ease, I've noted in your file that all medical information requires your explicit personal authorization. Your status as a healthcare professional affords you certain considerations." After hanging up, I turned to Vivian, who had been listening from the kitchen. "She's trying every angle, isn't she?" "Of course she is," Vivian replied, bringing me a cup of tea. "You've cut off her financial supply line. People get desperate when the gravy train stops running." Throughout the day, more calls came in, each one revealing how extensively Melissa was trying to undermine me. My primary care physician, my pharmacist, even the director of nursing at Boston Memorial where I'd worked for decades, all reaching out to verify the concerning reports they'd received from my worried daughter. Each conversation strengthened my resolve. These were my colleagues, people who knew my character and capabilities. Their calls weren't just professional courtesy, they were acts of respect for the relationships we'd built over years. By afternoon, James arrived with news about the eviction. "They've moved out," he reported, settling onto Vivian's sofa. Not willingly, of course. The sheriff had to be present, and there was quite a scene according to my paralegal who oversaw the process. Where will they go? Despite everything, I couldn't help but worry. James and Vivian exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "They're adults with resources," James reminded me gently. "That's not your concern anymore." "Old habits," I admitted. "I've spent my entire life worrying about Melissa." "And how has that worked out for you?" Vivian asked, not unkindly. Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time, it was Robert Chen, the bank manager I'd spoken with 2 days earlier. "Mrs. Simmons, I wanted to let you know that your son-in-law came to the bank today quite agitated. He was demanding access to your accounts, claiming you'd authorized him as your financial proxy." My blood ran cold. "I did no such thing." "We're well aware," he assured me. "Our security team escorted him from the premises after he became belligerent. However, I thought you should know he was carrying what appeared to be documents with your signature on them." "Forgeries," I whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than I thought possible. "Most likely," Robert agreed. "Nevertheless, I've placed additional security measures on all your accounts requiring in-person verification for any significant changes." After thanking him, I sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of what was happening finally hitting me full force. "They're trying to steal from me," I said, my voice barely audible. "My own daughter and her husband are actively trying to take control of everything I have." James leaned forward, his expression grave. "Anne, I think it's time we discuss a restraining order." "That seems so extreme," I protested weakly. "What's extreme is attempting to have your mother committed to a facility under false pretenses," Vivian countered. "What's extreme is forging financial documents." Deep down, I knew they were right. This wasn't a simple family disagreement that would blow over. It was a calculated attempt to seize control of my assets and autonomy. "There's something else we need to discuss," James added, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. "Your will and healthcare proxy." "I assume Melissa is currently named in both?" I nodded, the reality of what needed to be done settling heavily on my shoulders. "We need to change that immediately," he said. "Given recent events, Having Melissa in a position to make financial or medical decisions for you poses a significant risk. For 40 years, I'd never considered naming anyone but my daughter as my heir and proxy. Even after Thomas died, it seemed the natural order of things, mother to daughter, generation to generation. Who would I name instead? I asked, genuinely at a loss. Vivian squeezed my hand. That's entirely your decision, Anne, but it should be someone you trust completely, someone who has your best interests at heart. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text message from Caroline. Thought you should know. Several of us from the old nursing team are putting together a rotation schedule to help with your recovery once you're ready. No one messes with one of our own. Just say the word. Tears welled in my eyes as I showed the message to Vivian and James. You see, Vivian said softly, family isn't always blood. That evening, as Vivian helped me with my exercises, my phone rang again. This time, it was my grandson, Tyler, Melissa's 19-year-old son who was away at college in California. Grandma? What's going on? Mom and Dad aren't making any sense and they're saying you've lost your mind or something? His genuine confusion touched me. Tyler had always been a sweet boy, somewhat removed from his parents' materialistic values. It's complicated, sweetheart, I began, unsure how much to share. Your parents and I are having a serious disagreement about some financial matters. Is it true you kicked them out of their house? He asked hesitantly. The house is in my name, I explained. And yes, I asked them to leave after they made it clear they weren't willing to help me recover from my surgery. There was a pause, then, is that why you paid for that summer program for me last year? So you could hold it over everyone's heads later? The question stung, revealing how thoroughly Melissa had poisoned even this relationship. Tyler, I've never kept a ledger of the things I've done for people I love, I said carefully. I paid for your program because I believed in your talent and wanted to support your dreams. There were no strings attached. Mom says you're manipulating everyone with your money, he continued, clearly repeating what he'd been told. That you've always used it to control her. I closed my eyes, gathering my thoughts. This young man deserved honesty, not bitterness. Your mother and I have very different perspectives on our history together, I finally said. But I want you to know that whatever happens between us, it doesn't change how I feel about you. I don't know what to believe, he admitted. Dad's saying we might have to move, and Mom's been crying, and everything's just messed up. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, I told him sincerely. It's not fair to you. After we hung up, I sat quietly, contemplating the ripple effects of my actions. Standing up for myself wasn't affecting only Melissa and Derek. It was reshaping every relationship connected to them. Collateral damage, Vivian observed, reading my expression. It's unavoidable. He's just a boy, I murmured. He's 19, she reminded me. Old enough to form his own opinions eventually, once the dust settles. As night fell, I found myself standing before the mirror in Vivian's guest bathroom, really looking at my reflection for the first time in years. The woman staring back at me seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign, the same gray-streaked hair and laugh lines, but with a new steadiness in her gaze. I thought about the allies who had emerged in just the past 48 hours, colleagues, friends, professionals who respected me enough to question the narrative Melissa was spinning. For decades, I'd poured all my emotional energy into one relationship, neglecting the community that had quietly surrounded me all along. Enough, I whispered to my reflection. It's time to rewrite this story. The next morning, James arrived with a notary and a stack of documents that would fundamentally reshape my future. As we spread the papers across Vivian's dining table, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. We'll start with the revocation of power of attorney, James explained, sliding the first document toward me. This nullifies any previous authorization Melissa had to act on your behalf. I picked up the pen, my hand hovering over the signature line. Will this be public record? Yes, James confirmed. That's partly the point. To create an official paper trail showing you've explicitly removed her authority. I signed my name with a surprisingly steady hand. Next came the healthcare proxy, the document that would determine who could make medical decisions for me if I became incapacitated. For over 20 years, Melissa's name had occupied that space. Have you decided who you'd like to name? James asked gently. I glanced at Vivian, who had been quietly supportive throughout this process. Would you be willing? Her eyes widened in surprise. Of course, Anne. I'd be honored. But are you certain? More certain than I've been about anything in years, I replied. I trust you with my life, literally, in this case. As I signed that document, I felt a weight lifting. No longer would I have to fear that a health crisis might give Melissa control over me. The most difficult document came last, my revised will. You don't have to make final decisions today, James reminded me. This is just a preliminary revision to ensure Melissa and Derek don't remain your primary beneficiaries. I stared at the blank spaces where new names should go. I've never considered anyone else. Take your time, James advised. Many of my clients establish charitable foundations or trusts with specific purposes. Others choose to benefit institutions that were meaningful to them. As he spoke, an idea began forming, something that felt right in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Boston Memorial has a nursing scholarship program, I said slowly. For years, I've watched talented nurses' aides struggle to advance their education while working full-time. James nodded, making notes. A scholarship endowment would be entirely feasible with your assets. And Tyler, I added, my grandson shouldn't suffer for his parents' actions. I'd like to establish a trust for him, something Melissa and Derek can't access, but that will support his education and perhaps help him purchase his first home someday. Very reasonable, James agreed. Anything else? I thought about my modest collection of jewelry, including my mother's pearls that I'd always assumed would go to Melissa someday. Caroline Jenkins has a daughter who just entered nursing school. I'd like to leave my mother's pearls to her. As we continued working through the details, I realized I was dismantling the future I had always imagined, one where my possessions and resources would naturally flow to my daughter and her family. In its place, I was creating something new, a legacy that reflected values rather than obligation. By the time James and the notary left, I felt emotionally drained but oddly peaceful. The papers were signed, the decisions made. There would be no going back to the way things had been. How do you feel? Vivian asked, bringing me a cup of tea as I rested my leg. Like I've attended my own funeral, I admitted, but also like I've been reborn. She nodded thoughtfully. Endings and beginnings often happen simultaneously. That afternoon, my physical therapist Marcus arrived for our first home session. Vivian had arranged for him to come to her apartment rather than the outpatient facility where I'd originally been scheduled, another small kindness in a growing constellation of support. As Marcus guided me through exercises that made sweat bead on my forehead, my phone rang. Melissa's number flashed on the screen. Do you want to answer it? Vivian asked. I shook my head. Not right now. The phone eventually stopped ringing, only to light up with a text message. I know what you did. Changing your will won't fix what's broken between us. Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation instead of hiding behind lawyers. My hand trembled slightly as I showed Vivian the message. How did she find out so quickly? I wondered aloud. Small communities talk, Marcus offered unexpectedly as he helped stretch my leg. I've worked with enough wealthy families to know that banks, law offices, and medical facilities all have staff who gossip. No offense intended. None taken, I assured him. You're probably right. After Marcus left, I found myself staring at Melissa's message, trying to decode what lay beneath her words. Was there a genuine desire to repair our relationship, or just another attempt to regain access to my resources? You don't have to decide anything right now, Vivian reminded me, seeing my distress. I know, I sighed, but eventually, I'll have to face her. On your terms, Vivian emphasized, when you're stronger, both physically and emotionally. That evening, we received an unexpected visitor. The doorbell rang around 7, and Vivian peered through the peephole, her posture immediately stiffening. It's Derek, she whispered. My heart raced. I don't want to see him. I'll handle it, she assured me, opening the door just enough to block entry while keeping the security chain engaged. From my position in the living room, I could hear their conversation clearly. I need to speak with Anne. Derek's voice was tightly controlled. She's not receiving visitors, Vivian replied firmly. This is between family, he insisted. You have no right to interfere. I have every right to decide who enters my home, Vivian countered, and Anne has made it clear she doesn't wish to speak with you. Just tell her we're staying at the Marriott downtown. Derek's voice dropped, almost pleading now. Our credit cards are being declined. We can't access any accounts. Does she understand what she's doing to us? I believe she understands perfectly, Vivian replied coldly. Melissa's a mess, he continued. Is that what she wanted? To destroy her own daughter? Something in his words struck me as fundamentally wrong, the assumption that my actions were designed to hurt rather than to protect myself. Before Vivian could respond, I called out, "It's all right, Viv. Let me answer him." Using my walker, I made my way to the door. Vivian looked concerned but stepped aside. Derek's appearance shocked me. Just 3 days had passed since I'd left their house, but he looked disheveled, his usually immaculate appearance now rumpled and tired. "Anne," he began, his tone conciliatory, "this has all gotten out of hand. We need to talk." "No, Derek," I interrupted quietly. "What we need is space and time. What you and Melissa need is to experience the consequences of your actions and attitudes." So this is punishment?" His facade of politeness cracked slightly. "This is reality," I corrected him. "The reality that 2 adults with medical degrees and 6-figure salaries should be able to support themselves without draining their elderly mother's accounts. You've always been so generous before," he argued. "How were we supposed to know you'd suddenly change the rules?" The entitlement in his question left me momentarily speechless. Then, with perfect clarity, I replied, "Perhaps when you told me you weren't my nurses, you should have remembered that I was never your banker." I closed the door then, not waiting for his response. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from a surge of power I'd forgotten I possessed. "Bravo," Vivian said softly. That night, I lay awake long after Vivian had gone to bed, replaying Derek's words in my mind. "Our credit cards are being declined." How had they, 2 highly paid professionals, become so financially dependent on me that a few days without access to my accounts had left them unable to pay for a hotel room? The answer was uncomfortable, but obvious. I had created this situation through years of unquestioning generosity. Their entitlement had grown in direct proportion to my enabling. As painful as this upheaval was, perhaps it was necessary, not just for me, but for them as well. With that thought, I finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming not of the past I was leaving behind, but of the future I was reclaiming. 2 weeks after my confrontation with Derek, I was settling into a new rhythm. My knee was healing well, thanks to Marcus's diligent therapy sessions and my own determination. I could now move short distances with just a cane, each step a small victory. Vivian had been an unwavering pillar of support, but I knew I couldn't stay in her guest room indefinitely. We were beginning to discuss my options when an unexpected call arrived from my grandson Tyler. "Grandma, are you okay? I've been trying to reach you." His concern warmed my heart. "I'm doing much better, sweetheart. How are you holding up?" There was a pause, then. "I'm in Boston. Can I see you?" The request caught me off guard. "You're supposed to be in California for classes." "I took a week off," he explained. "Things at home are intense. Mom and Dad are fighting constantly. They had to move into this small apartment, and Mom keeps saying it's all your fault, but Dad's blaming her for mismanaging their finances, and I just needed to get away from it all." My heart ached for him. At 19, he shouldn't be caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts. "Of course you can see me," I told him, "but I should warn you, I'm not staying at my apartment. I'm with a friend." "That's fine," he said quickly. "I just want to hear your side of the story." After discussing it with Vivian, we arranged for Tyler to visit that afternoon. I spent the intervening hours anxiously wondering what Melissa had told him, how much he knew, and whether this visit was genuine or another manipulation tactic. When the doorbell rang at 3, Vivian gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze before going to answer it. Tyler stood in the doorway, looking both older and younger than I remembered. He'd grown his hair out since Christmas, and there was a new wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hi, Grandma," he said awkwardly, hovering at the threshold. "Tyler." I opened my arms, and after a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward to embrace me. "It's so good to see you." Vivian discreetly retreated to her bedroom, giving us privacy in the living room. "You look good," Tyler said, studying me as he sat down. "Mom said you were having cognitive issues after your surgery." I couldn't help the small, sad laugh that escaped. "I assure you my mind is perfectly clear. The only thing I'm suffering from is belated clarity." "What happened, Grandma?" "Everything was fine at Christmas, and now suddenly Mom says you've gone crazy and are trying to punish her for something." I took a deep breath, considering how much to share with this young man who was still finding his way in the world. "Tyler, has your mother ever told you where the money came from for your summer program at Berkeley last year? Or who made the down payment on your parents' house?" He shrugged. I assumed it was from their savings, or maybe they took out loans. I paid for your program, I said gently, just as I paid for your mother's medical school, and the down payment on their house, and countless other expenses over the years. His eyes widened. Why? Because I loved you all and wanted to help. I never expected anything in return, except perhaps basic kindness. Carefully, I explained what had happened after my surgery, the neglect, the cruel words, the final confrontation that led to my decision to leave and freeze the accounts. They wouldn't help you to the bathroom? Tyler looked horrified. But Mom's a doctor. Being a doctor doesn't automatically make someone compassionate, I replied sadly. Even to family. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. They told me you went crazy and started punishing them because they couldn't wait on you hand and foot while they were working. Is that how they characterized it? That I expected to be waited on hand and foot? He nodded, looking uncomfortable. Tyler, I spent 4 decades as a nurse. I've changed more bedpans and helped more patients to the bathroom than I can count. I understand the demands of medical careers. What I couldn't understand was why my own daughter and her husband would leave me crawling on the floor in pain rather than help me to the bathroom. So you kicked them out of their house? He asked, his tone not accusatory but confused. The house is in my name, I explained. I paid for it, and they hadn't been making the mortgage payments, despite their combined income of over $500,000 annually. Tyler's eyebrows shot up. They make that much? I nodded. Your parents have lived well beyond their means for years, relying on my support to fill the gaps. When I removed that support, the truth of their financial situation became apparent. But why not just talk to them about it? Why the lawyers and eviction notices? His question was fair, the kind that only someone young enough to still believe in simple solutions to complex problems would ask. Because when people show you who they are, you should believe them, I said softly. Your parents showed me exactly how they viewed me, not as a mother or grandmother worthy of care, but as a convenient source of financial support they felt entitled to. And now? Tyler asked. What happens now? I reached for his hand. Now we all have choices to make. Your parents can choose to acknowledge their behavior and work to rebuild trust, or they can continue blaming me for the consequences of their actions. And you, I squeezed his hand gently, you can form your own opinions based on what you know of me, of them, and of the situation. They want me to convince you to unfreeze the accounts, he admitted, not meeting my eyes. Mom said, if I could just talk some sense into you, everything could go back to normal. There it was, the real reason for his visit. Yet I couldn't find it in my heart to be angry with him. He was barely an adult, thrust into a situation he didn't create. Is that why you came? I asked quietly. He hesitated, then nodded slightly. At first, yeah, but now I'm not sure. They didn't tell me about any of this. They just said you were being irrational. And what do you think now that you've heard my side? Tyler looked up, conflict evident in his young face. I don't know what to think. You've always been there for me. For all of us. It doesn't make sense that you'd suddenly change unless something serious happened. It wasn't sudden for me, I told him. It was the culmination of years of taken-for-granted generosity. The surgery just brought everything to the surface. We talked for another hour, Tyler asking questions and me answering as honestly as I could without demonizing his parents. As our conversation wound down, he seemed troubled but thoughtful. Can I ask you something personal, Grandma? Of course. Are you going to write Mom out of your will completely? The directness of the question startled me. Has she discussed my will with you? He nodded, looking embarrassed. She said you're trying to cut her off from her rightful inheritance because of one argument. I took a steadying breath, hurt anew by Melissa's characterization. I've restructured my estate, yes. Some of my assets will go to nursing scholarships, some to charitable causes I believe in, and some, I looked directly at him, will be held in trust for you, accessible when you're a bit older. His eyes widened. For me? But Mom said, Tyler, inheritance isn't a right. It's a gift, and gifts should go to people who have shown love, respect, and appreciation, not entitlement. As he prepared to leave, Tyler hugged me tightly. I don't know what's going to happen with all this, but I'm glad I came. I needed to see for myself that you were okay. I'm more than okay, I assured him. I'm finally learning to value myself as much as I've valued others. After he left, Vivian emerged from her room. How did it go? They sent him to convince me to unfreeze the accounts. I sighed. Are you surprised? No, I admitted. But I am disappointed. Using him as a pawn. I shook my head, unable to finish the thought. At least he had the courage to hear your side, Vivian pointed out. That shows character. That night, I received a text from Tyler. Told Mom and Dad I saw you. They're not happy. I'm going back to school tomorrow. Thanks for being honest with me. Love you, Grandma. It wasn't a declaration of unconditional support, but it was something perhaps more valuable, an acknowledgement that there were multiple perspectives to consider, multiple truths to weigh. As I prepared for bed, I realized that Tyler's visit had clarified something important. This journey wasn't just about setting boundaries with Melissa and Derek. It was about giving the next generation a different model of self-respect and healthy relationships. Perhaps that, more than money or property, would be my true legacy. 3 weeks after Tyler's visit, I moved into Golden Pines Rehabilitation Center, not because Melissa had tried to have me committed there, but because I chose it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Are you sure about this? Vivian asked as she helped me pack my few belongings. You're welcome to stay with me until you're fully recovered. I'm sure, I replied, carefully folding a sweater. You've been incredible, Viv, but I need to start rebuilding my independence. The truth was more complex than I admitted to Vivian. Yes, I needed to regain my physical strength, but I also needed emotional space, room to process the seismic shifts in my life without feeling like a burden to anyone else. Golden Pines was where I'd sent countless patients over the years, confident they would receive excellent care. Caroline had arranged for me to have a private room overlooking the center's gardens, and many of the staff were former colleagues who greeted me with genuine warmth rather than professional detachment. Nurse Simmons, exclaimed Maria, who had once been a new graduate under my supervision and was now the rehabilitation unit's manager. We've got you in our best room, though it feels strange to have you as a patient rather than giving us orders. Please, it's just Anne now, I reminded her with a smile, and I promise to be a model patient. My days quickly fell into a structured rhythm, physical therapy in the mornings, occupational therapy in the afternoons, and quiet evenings reading or talking with other residents. The work was painful, but purposeful, each day bringing measurable progress in my knees' flexibility and strength. What I hadn't anticipated was how the center would become a gathering place for my newfound support system. Vivian visited daily, often bringing small treats or magazines. Caroline stopped by during her breaks, keeping me updated on hospital gossip. Even Dr. Harrison came to check my surgical site personally, rather than sending a resident. You've made quite the impression on people over the years, Vivian observed one afternoon as she watched a procession of visitors leave my room. I've never seen someone in rehab with such a steady stream of visitors. I never realized, I admitted. When you're working, you don't think about the connections you're building. You're just doing your job. No, Vivian shook her head firmly. You were never just doing your job, Anne. You were investing in people, and now they're returning that investment. A week into my stay, Marcus, my physical therapist, brought unexpected news during our session. Your daughter's been calling the center, he mentioned casually as he helped me navigate the parallel bars, asking about your progress, your expected discharge date, whether you're receiving visitors. My steps faltered. What have you told her? Nothing without your permission, he assured me. Patient confidentiality still applies, even with family members, but she's persistent. I nodded, unsurprised. Melissa doesn't give up easily when she wants something. Is there anything you'd like us to tell her if she calls again? Marcus asked carefully. I considered the question as I completed another length between the bars. Just that I'm progressing well and will contact her when I'm ready. That evening, alone in my room, I found myself staring at my silent phone. 3 messages from Melissa remained unopened, along with one from Derek. Part of me wanted to delete them unread. Another part felt compelled to know what they contained. Before I could decide, a soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Maria peeked in, her expression apologetic. I'm so sorry to bother you, Anne, but there's someone insisting on seeing you. She says she's your daughter. My heart raced. Melissa's here? Maria nodded. At the front desk. She's claiming it's her right as next of kin to assess your care situation. I told her visiting hours are over, but she's threatening to call the hospital administration. The old me would have acquiesced immediately, avoiding conflict at all costs. But I was no longer that woman. Please tell her that I'm not accepting visitors this evening, I said firmly, and remind her that as a medical professional, she should respect patient privacy and protocols. Maria looked relieved. I'll tell her, and I'll alert security, just in case. After she left, I sat with the knowledge that for the first time in our adult relationship, I had denied Melissa access to me. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Minutes later, my phone rang, Melissa's number flashing on the screen. This time, I answered. Hello, Melissa. They won't let me see you. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. What have you told them about me? Only that I'm not accepting visitors this evening, I replied calmly. It's been a tiring day. I'm not just any visitor. I'm your daughter, your only child. The emphasis on only was pointed, a reminder of the unique position she believed she held. Yes, you are, I acknowledged, and when I'm ready to see you, I'll let you know. Ready? She scoffed. What does that even mean? We need to talk about what you've done. The accounts, the house, the will. You can't just cut me out of your life over one bad day. It wasn't one bad day, Melissa, I said quietly. It was the culmination of years of imbalance in our relationship. And we will talk, eventually, but not tonight, and not until I'm stronger. Tyler said you've been manipulating him too, she accused, telling him you've set up some trust fund for him while cutting me out. The distortion of my conversation with Tyler stung, but didn't surprise me. I didn't manipulate anyone. I simply answered his questions honestly. You know what? Fine. Her voice hardened. Stay in that place with all your nurse friends fawning over you. Play the victim. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize how lonely life is without family. Is that what you think this is about? I asked, genuinely curious. That I want you to crawl back? Isn't it? Isn't this whole dramatic production designed to make us grovel for forgiveness? I sighed deeply. No, Melissa. This isn't about punishment or groveling. It's about recognizing my own worth and setting healthy boundaries, something I should have done decades ago. Boundaries, she repeated mockingly. Is that what your therapist is calling it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like plain old revenge. I'm sorry you see it that way, I said, refusing to be baited into anger. When you're ready to have a real conversation, one that acknowledges how your actions affected me, I'll be here. Until then, I need space to heal, both physically and emotionally. Whatever, Mom. Call me when you're done with your little empowerment journey. The line went dead. I placed my phone on the nightstand, hands shaking, but mind clear. Despite her dismissive words, I'd heard something beneath Melissa's anger, fear. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was facing a mother who wouldn't capitulate to emotional manipulation. Maria checked on me shortly after, concern evident in her expression. Everything okay? The receptionist said your daughter left in quite a state. Everything's fine, I assured her, surprised to find that I meant it. Actually, better than fine. I think I just passed an important test. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in weeks, unburdened by the anticipation of an inevitable confrontation. It would come eventually, but on my terms, when I was ready. The next morning, Marcus noted my improved mobility during therapy. Something's different today, he observed, as I completed my exercises with new determination. You're moving with more confidence. I smiled, thinking of the emotional weight I'd set down the night before. Let's just say I've finally stopped carrying unnecessary baggage. He laughed, not fully understanding the double meaning, but appreciating my renewed spirit. Whatever it is, keep it up. At this rate, you'll be ready for discharge ahead of schedule. As I worked through my exercises, I realized that this rehabilitation was about far more than my knee. I was rebuilding myself from the inside out, stronger, more balanced, and finally aligned with my own truth. 6 weeks after my surgery, I was discharged from Golden Pines with a certificate of completion that the staff had playfully decorated with gold stars. My knee, while still stiff in the mornings, was functioning better than it had in years. I could walk unassisted, climb stairs cautiously, and even stand long enough to cook simple meals. It was time to go home, not to Melissa's house or Vivian's guest room, but to my own apartment that had stood empty these past weeks. Are you sure you don't want to stay with me a bit longer? Vivian asked as she helped me pack my belongings. Your place has been closed up for a while. James had a cleaning service go through it last week, I assured her, and I need to start living my own life again. What I didn't say was that I was finally ready for the confrontation I'd been postponing. By returning to my own space, I was reclaiming not just my physical independence, but my emotional autonomy as well. As Vivian drove me home, I felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. My apartment building, an elegant pre-war structure in Back Bay, had always represented security to me. Now I wondered if it would feel different, knowing how much else in my life had changed. When we pulled up to the curb, I was surprised to see Tyler sitting on the steps, a duffel bag at his feet. "Grandma!" He stood as I carefully exited the car. "Surprise! Tyler? What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in California for finals?" He embraced me gently, mindful of my still-healing knee. "Finals were last week. I'm on summer break now. I thought maybe, if it's okay, I could stay with you for a few days?" I studied his face, noting the shadows under his eyes. "Of course you can stay. But does your mother know you're here?" His expression tightened. "Yeah, she knows. That's kind of why I'm here, actually." Once inside my apartment, which smelled freshly cleaned but still unmistakably like home, Tyler helped Vivian bring in my belongings while I settled onto my familiar sofa with a sigh of relief. "It's good to be home," I murmured, running my hand over the familiar fabric. After Vivian left with promises to check in tomorrow, Tyler sat across from me, his posture tense. "What's going on, sweetheart?" I asked directly. "You didn't fly across the country just to welcome me home." He took a deep breath. "Mom and Dad are getting divorced." The news stunned me. Despite their many flaws, Melissa and Derek had always seemed like a united front, particularly when it came to financial matters. "I'm so sorry," I said sincerely. "When did this happen?" "Dad moved out about 3 weeks ago. They've been fighting constantly since everything with you happened." Tyler looked down at his hands. "Dad says Mom's spending habits destroyed their credit and put them in debt. Mom says Dad never would have married her if he hadn't thought he was getting your money eventually." The ugliness of their accusations toward each other pained me, especially knowing that Tyler was caught in the crossfire. "And how are you handling all this?" I asked gently. "Not great," he admitted. "That's partly why I came here. I needed to get away from both of them for a while." "I understand," I assured him, reaching for his hand. "You're always welcome here." "There's something else," he added hesitantly. "Mom knows I'm here, and she wants to come talk to you. She says it's time to clear the air." I tensed involuntarily. "Did she put you up to this? Ask you to soften me up first?" "No." Tyler looked genuinely offended. "I mean, she knows I was coming to see you, but this was my idea. I'm tired of being stuck in the middle. I thought maybe if you two could actually talk." His hope was so earnest, so youthful in its optimism, that I couldn't bring myself to dismiss it outright. "When does she want to come?" I asked, mentally preparing myself. "Tomorrow afternoon? She has the day off." I nodded slowly. "All right, tell her she can come at 2 o'clock. But Tyler," I fixed him with a serious look, "I need you to understand that this conversation may not go the way you're hoping. Some rifts can't be bridged in a single meeting." "I know," he said quietly. "I just want you both to try." That evening, after settling Tyler in the guest room, I called James to inform him of the impending meeting. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. "It has to happen eventually. Would you like me to be present? Or perhaps Vivian?" I considered his offer, tempted by the security of having an ally present. But ultimately, I shook my head, though he couldn't see the gesture. "No," I decided. "This needs to be between Melissa and me. Having others there would only complicate things. Call me immediately after," he instructed. "And remember, you don't have to agree to anything on the spot. You can always say you need time to consider." The next morning, I woke early, a lifetime of hospital shifts having permanently altered my internal clock. I found Tyler already in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. "I thought you might like some protein after all that hospital food," he explained, somewhat sheepishly presenting a plate of slightly overcooked eggs. "It looks wonderful," I assured him, touched by the gesture. As we ate, I studied my grandson, his father's height and build, but with hints of Melissa's features around the eyes and mouth. He was the best of both of them, untainted by the materialism and resentment that had poisoned their relationship with me. "Tyler," I began carefully, "about today's meeting with your mother." He looked up expectantly. "I want you to make yourself scarce while she's here. Go to a movie, visit the public garden. Anything. This conversation needs to happen without an audience. He frowned slightly. But what if? No what ifs, I said firmly. This isn't your burden to carry, sweetheart. It's between your mother and me. Though clearly disappointed, he nodded in agreement. At precisely 2 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Tyler had left an hour earlier, promising to return around dinner time. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. Melissa stood in the hallway, looking both familiar and foreign. She'd lost weight, her tailored suit hanging slightly loose on her frame, and there was a new hardness around her mouth. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Melissa," I replied, stepping back to allow her entry. "Please come in." She entered cautiously, her eyes scanning the apartment as though looking for changes. I led her to the living room, where I'd arranged 2 chairs facing each other, close enough for conversation, but with enough distance to maintain my personal space. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, falling back on the social niceties that had structured our interactions for years. "No," she said shortly. "I think we've had enough pretense, don't you?" I settled into my chair, meeting her gaze directly. "Why are you here, Melissa?" "Tyler thinks we need to talk," she said, her tone suggesting she found the idea dubious at best. "And what do you think?" She sighed, some of her defensive posture deflating. "I think our relationship is beyond repair, but I also think we need closure." "Closure," I repeated. "That sounds very final." "Isn't that what you wanted?" she challenged. "When you froze the accounts, evicted us from our home, and rewrote your will?" "What I wanted," I replied evenly, "was respect, consideration, basic human kindness from my daughter during a vulnerable time." She flinched slightly but recovered quickly. "One bad day, Mom. We had one bad day after years of taking care of you, and you punished us like we were criminals." "Taking care of me?" I echoed incredulously. "Melissa, I've been financially supporting you and Derek for years. I paid for your education, your wedding, your house, and never let us forget it," she interrupted, color rising in her cheeks. "Every gift came with invisible strings. Every generous gesture was another way to remind me that I couldn't succeed on my own." Her accusation struck me like a physical blow. "Is that really how you perceived my help? As some sort of power play? What else was I supposed to think?" she demanded. The great Nurse Simmons, beloved by all, swooping in to rescue her struggling daughter at every turn. "Do you have any idea what it was like growing up in your shadow? Hearing about how respected and admired you were while I was just an afterthought?" I stared at her, genuinely bewildered. "An afterthought? Melissa, everything I did was for you. Every extra shift, every promotion I worked for, it was all to give you opportunities I never had. Opportunities to become you," she countered bitterly. "But I could never be you, could I? Never quite good enough, never quite successful enough on my own terms." As she spoke, I began to see glimpses of a narrative I'd never considered. How my pride in her accomplishments might have been perceived as expectations she could never meet. How my financial support, intended as love, might have felt like an ongoing statement of her inadequacy. "I never meant to make you feel that way," I said quietly. "I was trying to help, to show my love the only way I knew how. By buying it," she stated flatly. "And then when we couldn't repay that love in exactly the way you wanted, you took it all away." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding hanging between us. "Derek's filing for bankruptcy," she finally said, her voice tight. "Without access to your funds, it turns out we were completely overextended. The credit card debt, the car leases, the club memberships." I didn't respond, waiting for her to continue. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" she asked, a hint of the old defiance returning. "That you were right? That we were living beyond our means? That without your money, we're falling apart?" "No," I replied truthfully. "What I wanted was for my daughter to see me as a person with feelings and needs, not just as a convenience or a resource." Melissa looked away, a muscle working in her jaw. "Well, I see you now. I see exactly who you are and what matters to you." "And what is that?" I asked softly. "Control," she said simply. "You couldn't control me anymore with guilt and generosity, so you found another way. Congratulations, Mom. You won." As she stood to leave, I realized with profound sadness that we were speaking different languages, experiencing different realities. What I saw as self-respect, she perceived as punishment. What I felt as betrayal, she experienced as liberation from oppressive expectations. "This isn't about winning, Melissa," I said as she reached the door. "There are no winners here." She paused, her back to me. "Tell Tyler I'll call him tomorrow." After she left, I sat motionless, feeling the full weight of what had just transpired. There had been no reconciliation, no tearful embraces or promises to do better. Instead, there had been truth, painful, unvarnished truth from both sides. And yet, despite the ache in my heart, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. For perhaps the first time, Melissa and I had spoken honestly to each other, without the veneer of politeness that had masked our true feelings for so long. It wasn't closure, it wasn't healing, but it was real. And reality, however painful, was preferable to the comforting illusions I'd lived with for decades. When Tyler returned that evening, his hopeful expression quickly faded as he took in my solemn demeanor. "It didn't go well, did it?" he asked, settling beside me on the sofa. "It went, honestly," I replied carefully. "Sometimes honesty doesn't feel good in the moment." He nodded, seeming older than his 19 years. "Mom texted me. She just said, 'Some rifts can't be repaired.' Is that true?" I considered his question, wanting to be truthful without destroying his hope entirely. "Some rifts can't be repaired in the ways we initially hope," I said finally. "But that doesn't mean healing is impossible. It just might look different than we expected." "Different how?" "Well," I began, gathering my thoughts, "perhaps instead of trying to recreate what was lost, we build something new, with clearer boundaries and more honesty." Tyler was quiet for a moment, processing this. "She's really hurting, you know. Even before everything happened with you, she was always trying to prove something. To herself, to Dad, to everyone at the hospital." His insight surprised me. "When did you become so perceptive?" He shrugged, a small smile breaking through his serious expression. "I watch people. Always have. Maybe that's why I'm studying psychology instead of medicine like Mom wanted." We ordered pizza that night, a rare indulgence in my usually health-conscious household, and talked about lighter topics, his studies, his friends in California, his plans for the summer. "Actually," he said as we finished the last slices, "I was wondering if I could stay here for the summer. Not the whole time. I have a research position lined up in August, but for June and July?" The request warmed me. "Of course you can. But what about your parents? Dad's moving to Chicago for a new job, and Mom—" He hesitated. "Mom's not in a great place right now. The apartment they're renting is tiny, and she's working all the time. I think we'd just make each other miserable." I reached for his hand. "You're always welcome here, Tyler, for as long as you need." Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm emerged in my apartment. Tyler slept late, as college students do, while I continued my morning exercises to strengthen my knee. We shared meals, watched old movies I'd loved at his age, and gradually settled into a companionable routine that felt both novel and deeply familiar. One morning, as I returned from my daily walk, now extended to a full mile, I found Vivian waiting outside my building. "Surprise inspection," she announced with a grin. "I want to see how you're really doing, not just the sanitized version you give me on the phone." Over coffee in my kitchen, she studied me with a critical eye. "You look good, Anne. There's color in your cheeks again." "I feel good," I admitted. "Better than I have in years, actually." "And how are things with Melissa?" I sighed, stirring my coffee absently. "We're at an impasse. She believes I betrayed her. I believe she betrayed me. Neither of us seems capable of seeing the other's perspective." "Give it time," Vivian advised. 6 months ago, you wouldn't have even acknowledged there was another perspective to consider." Her observation struck me as profoundly true. For decades, I'd operated under the assumption that my intentions were transparent, that everyone could see that my generosity came from love, not control. I'd never stopped to consider how my actions might be perceived by someone with her own insecurities and struggles. "I've been thinking about going back to work," I said, changing the subject. "Not full-time nursing, of course, but maybe something at the hospital. They're always looking for patient advocates." Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Are you sure that's wise? Melissa works there." "It's a big hospital," I pointed out. "And besides, I can't organize my life around avoiding my daughter forever." The truth was, I missed feeling purposeful. The weeks of recovery had given me time to reflect on what truly mattered to me. And while financial security and self-respect were important, so was the sense of contribution that had defined most of my adult life. Well, Vivian said thoughtfully, if anyone can navigate that potential minefield, it's you. Just promise me you'll be careful. 3 days later, I submitted my application for a part-time position in the hospital's patient advocacy department. A week after that, I was called for an interview. The morning of the interview, I stood before my closet, surveying my options. Most of my work clothes felt too formal for the role I was seeking, while my casual attire seemed too relaxed. Finally, I settled on a teal blouse that Tyler had once told me brought out the color in my eyes, paired with simple black slacks and low heels. As I prepared to leave, Tyler emerged from his room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Big day, right?" he yawned. "The interview?" I nodded, suddenly nervous. "Is it ridiculous for a 68-year-old woman to be anxious about a job interview?" "Not at all," he assured me. "It shows you care." He gave me a quick hug before shuffling toward the kitchen in search of breakfast. "You've got this, Grandma. Just be yourself. Be myself." Such simple advice, yet so profound. For most of my life, I'd defined myself through my relationships and responsibilities. Nurse, wife, mother, widow, provider. Now I was learning to define myself on my own terms. The interview went better than I'd anticipated. The department director, a woman about 15 years my junior, had actually been one of my nursing students decades earlier. "Nurse Simmons," she greeted me warmly. "I can't tell you how thrilled we are to have you apply. Your reputation for patient advocacy precedes you." 2 hours later, I left the hospital with a job offer and a start date for the following Monday. 3 shifts per week, helping patients navigate the increasingly complex healthcare system, using my experience and knowledge to ensure their voices were heard. It felt right. As I walked toward the parking garage, a familiar figure emerged from the hospital's main entrance. Melissa, in her white coat, deep in conversation with a colleague. She hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment I considered ducking behind a pillar to avoid an awkward encounter. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and continued walking. When she finally looked up and noticed me, her expression flickered through surprise, wariness, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Mom?" She excused herself from her colleague and approached me cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "I had an interview," I replied simply. "In patient advocacy. I start next week." She blinked, clearly taken aback. "You're coming back to work? Here?" "3 days a week," I confirmed. "It's a big hospital, Melissa. I don't expect we'll cross paths often." She nodded slowly, processing this information. "Tyler mentioned you were considering it, but I didn't think that I'd actually do it," I finished for her. "Or that they'd hire me?" "Neither, I guess." She adjusted her stethoscope, a nervous habit I recognized from her medical school days. "Well, congratulations." An awkward silence fell between us. Around us, hospital staff hurried past, caught up in their own urgent missions. "How are you?" I finally asked, the question inadequate, but sincere. "Managing," she replied shortly. Then, with visible effort, she added, "The divorce will be final next month. Derek's already moved to Chicago." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Whatever their flaws as a couple, divorce was painful, especially after 15 years. "Are you?" she asked, a hint of the old bitterness creeping into her tone. "I would think you'd be glad to see us fall apart." "No," I said firmly. "I never wanted that, Melissa. Despite everything, I only ever wanted you to be happy." She studied me for a moment, as though trying to determine my sincerity. "Tyler seems happy staying with you. He's a remarkable young man," I said, grateful for the safer topic. "You should be proud of him." "I am," she acknowledged. "He's the one thing Derek and I did right." Another silence, less tense than before. "I should get back," she finally said, gesturing toward the hospital. "Surgery in 20 minutes. "Of course." She hesitated, then added, Maybe we could have coffee sometime to discuss how we'll handle working in the same facility." It wasn't an olive branch exactly, more like a pragmatic acknowledgement of our new reality. But it was something. "I'd like that," I replied. As she turned to go, I called after her. "Melissa, I meant what I said before. I do want you to be happy." She paused, not turning back fully. "I know, Mom. In your way, you always did." It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't even particularly warm, but it was honest. And after decades of politeness masking deeper resentments, Honesty felt like a foundation we might eventually build upon. That evening, as Tyler and I celebrated my new position with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, I found myself filled with an unexpected sense of optimism. "You seem different," Tyler observed, studying me over his pad Thai. "Lighter, somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "For the first time in my life, I'm making choices based solely on what I want and need, not on what I think others expect of me." "And how does that feel?" he asked. I considered the question, searching for the right words. "It feels like rebirth, like I'm finally becoming the person I was always meant to be." "At 68? He teased gently. "Why not?" I smiled. "Some flowers bloom late, but they bloom just as beautifully." As the evening sun filtered through my apartment windows, casting everything in a golden glow, I realized that the painful journey of the past months had led me not to an ending, but to a beginning. The relationship I'd tried so desperately to preserve might never be fully restored, but in its place, something new was emerging. A life defined by authenticity rather than accommodation, by self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. It wasn't the future I had once imagined, but as I looked at my grandson across the table and thought about my new role at the hospital, I knew with absolute certainty it was the future I deserved, and for the first time in decades, that knowledge was enough.